Mark steps up to Lena, expecting her to back down, but she doesn't. With a calm voice and fiery eyes, she says, "You don't get to control me, Mark." In a split second, she strikes, knocking him back. The bus goes silent. Lena has taken control, but what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Her eyes skimmed over the usual sea of faces she had passed through the hallways 1,000 times, yet never truly saw her. It wasn't that Lena didn't try, she did. But the world, her world, was often too busy with its own judgments to care about her. She had learned early on that the quieter you were, the less likely they were to notice you. And that suited her just fine. But today, as the cool air from outside seemed to settle in with her, something felt different. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she moved to find a seat, her movements fluid, practiced. She could feel it before she even turned her head, the sudden shift in atmosphere. Mark Donovan had just boarded the bus. Lena didn't have to look at him to know. She could hear the familiar low chuckle, the jeer that clung to the air like a bad smell. It was the sound of a predator spotting its prey. He was always on the lookout, always waiting for someone different to tear down. Lena had long since become used to the tension his presence caused, and as she started walking past him, Mark's sharp, condescending gaze met hers. It was a look she knew all too well. His eyes narrowed, as if he had just spotted something he could crush beneath his boot. He didn't hesitate. "Back of the bus, Lena," he sneered, his words heavy with venom. "This is where you belong." The command was louder than it needed to be, meant for everyone to hear. The other students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, eyes flitting between Mark and Lena. It was as though the bus had suddenly grown smaller, the air thicker. Lena's stomach twisted, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing it. She didn't flinch. She couldn't. Instead, she focused on the motion of her feet, steady and deliberate, trying to hold herself together. Mark didn't stop there. His broad shoulders brushed past her, and the stink of arrogance followed him as he made a show of pushing past, nearly knocking into her. He could have chosen any seat, but he took a few more steps forward just to make it clear that Lena wasn't worth anything more than the scraps at the back of the bus. His laughter rippled through the air like an echo, bouncing off the heads of the other students, who now seemed to be holding their breath. No one moved. No one said a word. The tension hung, thick and suffocating. But all Lena could do was keep her eyes forward, her hands clenched tightly in the pockets of her coat, her chest tightening with a growing heat. She had heard these things before, seen this play out so many times that it was almost rote. But today, Lena felt the anger swirling inside of her. It was different. A rawness was bubbling up, breaking through the silence that had once protected her. Today, she couldn't let it slide. Today, she wasn't going to take it quietly. The bus jolted forward, its tires screeching slightly as it pulled out of the stop, the engine's hum reverberating in the air like a low warning. The rhythm of the ride did nothing to soothe Lena. If anything, it felt like the world was moving too fast, leaving her stuck in place, suffocating under the weight of a moment she couldn't escape. She had tucked herself into the back corner, the furthest from Mark's relentless eyes, but it didn't matter. His voice, the low, mocking taunt, echoed in her skull, bouncing off the corners of her thoughts, refusing to be silenced. The sting of humiliation still burned in her chest, a raw ache that spread with each breath she took. She had always known this feeling, the sense of being small in a world that saw her as less than nothing. But today, it felt different. Today, something was building inside of her, rising like a slow burn that threatened to rage out of control. Mark's words weren't just an insult. They were a spark that had ignited something in her she hadn't known was there, something that had been smoldering under the surface for far too long. She tried to concentrate on her math homework, but the numbers blurred on the page, their meaning lost in the fog of her thoughts. She wasn't just angry anymore. She was tired. Tired of the same old games, the same tired routines. She was tired of being invisible to everyone who mattered, of letting people like Mark think they could treat her like dirt and get away with it. The constant pressure, the endless pushing down, had been grinding her into the ground. But she wasn't going to bend this time, not today. Her heart beat faster, the sound of it pounding in her ears like a drum. She was done being silent. She was done being small. But Mark wasn't finished. She felt his gaze before she even saw it. A heavy weight on her shoulders, a reminder that he was watching her, feeding off the very silence that she clung to. He couldn't stand the idea that she wasn't reacting, that she wasn't giving him what he wanted: fear, anger, submission. His smirk twisted, growing wider as he glanced back over his shoulder, his eyes gleaming with a sense of superiority. The laughter of his friends followed, a low, mocking hum that stung her ears and sent a fresh wave of heat through her veins. He wasn't just teasing anymore. This wasn't just a game. He was testing her, pushing her, seeing how far he could go before she broke. The bus creaked and swerved, but it was all a blur to Lena. Mark's voice sliced through the hum of the engine. "You think you're better than me, Lena? You don't even know your place," he shouted, his words thick with venom, like a poison meant to spread through her. The bus fell into an uncomfortable silence, and she could feel the weight of everyone's eyes shifting toward her. Lena's stomach tightened, her breath caught in her throat for a split second as the words sank in. But she didn't flinch. She couldn't. Not now. She had been down this road too many times, seen it play out again and again, with the same outcome. She knew what he wanted, what he needed, her response, her weakness, but she refused to give it to him. She wasn't going to be that girl anymore, the one who let people like Mark decide her worth. The moment stretched, heavy and thick with anticipation, and for a brief second she felt a flicker of doubt, a tiny seed of fear trying to root itself inside of her. But she crushed it down, pushing it aside. She had learned to survive in a world that wasn't kind to people like her. She had learned to stand firm even when everything around her was trying to knock her down. Her heart beat in her chest, louder now, but steady. She could feel the heat of the blood rushing through her veins, the fire starting to burn in her gut. The storm inside her was rising, and she was done pretending it wasn't there. She wasn't going to wait for someone else to stand up for her. Today, for the first time in a long time, Lena was going to do it herself. She took a slow, steady breath, focusing on the pulse beneath her skin. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she was ready to stop being a spectator in her own life. The bus slowed as it neared the intersection, the soft hiss of the brakes cutting through the tension that hung in the air. Mark, standing just a few feet away, had no idea what he was in for. He had been counting on Lena's silence, on her compliance with the role he had written for her, the quiet, invisible girl who could be pushed and prodded without ever fighting back. But Lena wasn't the person he thought she was. Not anymore. His sneer deepened as he took another step toward her, his eyes gleaming with the certainty of his victory. The students around them shifted nervously, their eyes darting between Mark and Lena, uncertain of what was about to unfold. The sound of Mark's mocking laughter fell away as Lena rose from her seat, her movements smooth and deliberate, like a predator who had finally decided it was time to strike. Her eyes locked with his, and in that instant, everything about Lena shifted. She wasn't the girl who cowered under his gaze anymore. She wasn't the one who shrank back when the world pressed in. Her voice, steady and calm, filled the space between them, but there was something else in it, something raw, something undeniable. "You don't know me, Mark." The words weren't a challenge. but they rang like one. It wasn't defiance alone in her voice. It was a quiet power, a strength that Mark hadn't seen before. Her stance was unshakable, her posture upright, as though she had shed the weight of the years spent hiding and was now standing in the full force of her own presence. The fire in her voice flickered like a warning. Mark took another step, sure that she would wilt under the pressure, that her eyes would flinch away, that she would collapse under the weight of his gaze. But Lena didn't flinch. She moved instead, swift, like a coiled spring unwinding in one fluid motion. Her elbow struck with surgical precision, landing hard against Mark's stomach before he even had time to react. The breath whooshed out of him, the shock of the impact visible on his face as he staggered back. But Lena didn't stop there. Her body twisted in a smooth, practiced arc, spinning away from him with a fluidity that caught him off guard. Mark, thrown off balance, took a clumsy step backward, his hand flailing as he tried to regain control. But the moment was already lost. His confident sneer was gone, replaced by a flicker of confusion and a deep, bruising embarrassment. The bus was silent. The hum of the engine, the whispers of the other students, all faded into a muffled stillness. The only sound was the rush of air as Mark's feet slid across the floor, his body stumbling, desperately trying to recover from the unexpected force of her movement. Lena stood tall, her chest heaving with exertion, but her face, her eyes, those were the things that held the power. There was no fear in them. There was no hesitation. There was only quiet, unwavering strength. For a moment, it seemed like the world had stopped. Mark's face, flushed red with rage, contorted in disbelief. He had underestimated her. He had thought of her as nothing more than an easy target, someone who wouldn't fight back. But now, the realization that he had been wrong hit him like a blow. He had pushed too far, too fast, and in doing so, he had awakened something in Lena he hadn't been prepared for. The entire bus seemed to hold its breath. No one moved, no one spoke. But Lena didn't need their approval. She wasn't looking for validation. She was looking only at Mark, watching him as his eyes flickered with something he rarely experienced. Defeat. He had never expected this from her. And in that silence, with her posture unbroken and her gaze unwavering, Lena showed him the truth. She was no longer the girl he thought she was. She wasn't the one who would be pushed aside. She wasn't the one who would be ignored. Lena was something far more dangerous now, someone who had finally found her strength and was no longer afraid to wield it. The screech of the bus brakes sliced through the thick silence, a sharp, jarring noise that rattled the air. The driver's hands tightened on the wheel, but his gaze remained fixed straight ahead, unwilling to meet the chaos that had unfolded behind him. Mark, still reeling from the shock of his own humiliation, opened his mouth as though to speak, to retort, to salvage what little dignity he had left. But before he could form a single word, Lena's voice cut through the tension with calm, unwavering clarity. "You don't get to control me, Mark. I know who I am, and I will not let you make me feel small. Not anymore." Her words hung in the air, a quiet storm that spoke volumes. There was no trembling in her voice, no uncertainty, just a steady, powerful declaration. Mark flinched, his jaw tightening as if the very force of her resolve had struck him in the gut. But Lena wasn't done. She wasn't waiting for his reaction, nor did she need it. With deliberate steps, she turned and walked toward the front of the bus, the sound of her shoes against the floor, a steady rhythm that echoed in the silence that followed. As Lena took her seat, calm and composed, the bus seemed to hold its collective breath. The weight of the moment lingered, and for a long second, no one spoke. Then, as if on cue, a murmur began to spread among the students, a ripple of approval. It wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. A few heads nodded, some faces softened in a way that hadn't been there before. Lena had done something none of them had expected. She hadn't backed down. She hadn't played by the rules Mark had set. Instead, she had shifted the balance of power in a way no one saw coming. The bus continued its journey toward school, but the air inside had changed. Mark, still seated at the back, seethed in silence, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. His usual bravado had cracked, and for the first time, he seemed unsure of himself. The control he'd always relied on had slipped through his fingers, and he was left with nothing but the bitter sting of defeat. Lena, on the other hand, was unshaken. She had reclaimed her space, not through violence, but through something far more potent. Her strength was in her presence, in her refusal to let anyone dictate who she was. It was a quiet power, a force that couldn't be measured by physical confrontation, but by the sheer will to stand tall, to remain unbroken. The rest of the school day unfolded with a strange sense of shift. Word spread quickly about what had happened on the bus. Lena's peers began to look at her differently. The whispers that had once followed her, the judgment, the disregard, those things began to fade into the background. In their place was a subtle, growing respect. It was in the way they spoke to her, in the way they made space for her in the halls, in the way they quietly acknowledged her strength. Mark, meanwhile, was left to confront the fallout of his actions. The facade of superiority he had so carefully crafted began to crumble. He was forced to grapple with the reality of what had happened, his own arrogance dismantled by a single, unflinching moment of defiance. Lena had become something he could never fully comprehend, a person who didn't need to seek validation from anyone, least of all him. By the time the school day ended, Lena found herself walking home in the fading light of the afternoon. The sky was painted with soft hues of pink and purple, a reflection of the calm that had settled over her. The weight of the day, the tension, the turmoil, it all seemed distant now, like it had happened to someone else. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: pride. Not because she had physically fought back, but because she had done something far more powerful. She had shown herself who she was. She had proven to herself more than anyone else that strength came from within. It wasn't about standing up to the world. It was about standing up to herself and refusing to let anyone define her. As she walked beneath the soft glow of the streetlights, Lena knew she was free. Free to be who she was, unapologetically and without fear. The world could try to put her in a box, but she would never fit. She had claimed her place, not by force, but by the quiet, resolute power of her own identity. And for the first time in a long time, she was truly at peace with it.